So hello again. As you know, I am Eli the Computer Guy over here for Everyman IT. Today's class is Linux network configuration. So now that you have your Linux server, now that you understand how to use Vim and users and all that kind of stuff, now we need to get to the networking, how to make sure your server can get onto the network and that other people can get to it if necessary. Again, as with everything else in Linux, this is not too complicated if you just take it slow and you understand some very specific commands. So this class will teach you those commands, we'll bring you through so that you can get your Linux server onto the network and onto the internet. So give me a second to put a few things together, and then we will get into the class Linux network configuration. So before we delve deeply into the whole Linux network configuration, we need to talk about a few tasks that you're going to be able to need to perform once you start configuring the networking for your Linux server. Now the first task, or the first command that you need to know how to use, is what is called ifconfig. ifconfig. This is the Linux version of the Windows ipconfig, or I suppose ipconfig is a version of ifconfig, whatever. If you've used the ipconfig command in Windows, the ifconfig looks basically the same. If you run sudo ifconfig, this will give you all the information about the network cards that are on your system. So it'll say, you know, F0, whether it's DHCP, whether it has an IP address or not, etc. So just like ipconfig in the Windows world, it'll say, you know, network card 1, network card 2, network card 3, gives you the MAC address, gives you all the information. So if you need to see if you have an IP address assigned to one of your network adapters, you run sudo ifconfig, and this will give you all the information you need to know. Pretty simple, right? Now, if your Linux server is a DHCP client, you know, from personal experience, I always like to give my Linux servers static IP addresses. I think it works out better. But if for whatever reason your Linux server is a client of DHCP and you need to get a new lease or a new IP address, all you need to do is you need to run the command sudo dhclient. So dhclient will release and renew your IP address. So you know, if your network is acting a little weird, and you think it might be because you have a bad IP address, just run sudo dhclient, and this will release and renew your IP address. It's pretty simple. Now, finally, you know, whenever you're messing with configuration files and such for any services on a Linux computer, you need to restart the services once you are done playing with the configuration files. And networking is the same way. So, you know, when you go in, we'll be talking about in a moment, changing your network configuration files. Once you get done changing those configuration files, you need to restart the service so that those configuration files load. Again, we talked about way back a couple of classes ago how to start and restart and stop services. With networking, again, it's pretty simple. All you do is you do sudo /etc/init_d/ and then it is networking. And then you do space, and then you say start, stop, or restart. So you normally do restart. So once you change the network configuration files on your Linux server, you do sudo space /etc/init_d/ networking is the service space restart, and this will restart the networking service and load all those new configuration files that you just played with. So those are the three simple tasks that you have to understand. Or basically it's just gonna turn into a whole mess when you start playing with networking. So again, ifconfig will show you all the information about your network cards. dhclient releases and renews your IP addresses, and the networking service in INI.d is the service that you're going to need to restart whenever you change your networking configuration files. You understand that? And it's going to make your life a lot easier. So here we are back at the terminal. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use the ifconfig ifconfig command to see what's going on with our network adapters. So all you do is you do sudo space ifconfig, enter. And now this tells us, so we have one network adapter on here, so it's Eth0. The INET address is 10.0.2.15, broadcast address 10.0.2.255, subnet mask is class C subnet mask, etc. So this is what gives us information about our network cards. Now on this computer, it does receive its IP address from a DHCP server. So in order to release and renew an IP address, you simply use the command dhclient. So you do sudo space dhclient, enter. And that's all it had to do. Pretty quick, so it released 10.0.2.15 and it looks like it got it back. So depending on how fast your DHCP server is and how everything talks to each other, this can be a rather quick process, or it could take 30 or 40 seconds to do. But that's all you do to release and renew your IP address. Now, like I say, we're going to go into changing configuration files. So when you change your network configuration files, you need to remember to restart the service. Remember, when a service starts, it loads all the information from the configuration files into memory. And it doesn't go back to those configuration files generally until the service itself restarts. So you can cause yourself an absolute nightmare of a time if you go in, you change configuration files, and then you go to test those changes. If you haven't restarted the service, you'll be wondering why the changes haven't taken effect. So you'll make more changes and more changes and more changes. You'll go down to what's called the rabbit hole of hell, where you just want to rip all your hair out because it doesn't make a damn bit of sense. Well, the reason is because you did not restart the service, and therefore those new configuration files never got uploaded into the system. So it's still using the old configuration files. So just remember this, whenever you change configurations for anything, whether it's networking, Apache, PHP, whatever, make sure to restart the corresponding service. So with networking, it's the networking service. We go to sudo space /utc /init.d/networking space restart. So this will restart the service, enter. And that quick, it restarted the service. So by doing that, it flushed out all the old configuration files. It looked at the configuration files as they are right at this second, and then it pulled them in and is now using those configuration files. So just remember, ifconfig shows you the current network cards that are attached to your system and what they're doing. dhclient is what releases and renews your IP address, and then the sudo etc ini.d /networking. That is a service that you're going to have to restart once you change configurations. Since you've got that down, let's go and talk about the actual network configuration file. So I think you'll agree those tasks are pretty simple to do. So now we need to talk about the configuration files for networking on your computer, your Linux server. So, like I say, in the Windows world, you right click, you left click, and you change stuff. In Linux, you have to change specific files and actually edit them with something like Vim. Now, with Ubuntu Linux, you go to the network interfaces file. So you go to sudo you do sudo and then vim. So sudo vim is the editor /etc/network/interfaces. This is the file that controls the IP addresses and all that kind of stuff for the network cards that are on your system. Now, once you open up that configuration file, you'll see the first thing it says will be auto, and then eth probably 0. Now you have to remember, whenever you're dealing with the Linux world, Linux works on the ordinal number system. What this means is in the ordinal system, 0 is the first number, not 1. So whenever you're dealing with the first hard drive, it would be the 0 hard drive. If you're dealing with the first network card, it would be 0. So F0 is the first network card in the system. So if you're trying to change a first network card, don't do F1, do F0. So F0 is the first network card. Auto, what this is, this states the speed. So auto is auto negotiate. So, you know, most network cards nowadays are 10100 or 10100 gig cards. All this auto means is that it will auto decide what speed it should go and whether it should be half duplex or full duplex. Unless you're doing something really special, you just leave that auto there. You can change it, but there's not a whole lot to it. Under that, you'll see iFace, and then you'll see if this is a static IP address. We'll show you the static IP address. It'll say again, it'll say F0, then it'll say inet, and it'll say static. So interface, Ethernet 0, inet is static. So this is a static IP address. Then under that, you'll see address, and it will have the IP address, 10.1.10.5, whatever that is. You'll see net mask. That is the subnet mask, 255.255.255.0. Then you'll see the network. This is basically just what network is this on. So if the IP address is 10.1.10.5, the network will be 10.1.10.0. That's just how it works. Then the broadcast. When you're dealing in the Windows world, you don't normally put in what the broadcast address is. But as long as you're dealing with normal subnets, we'll have another class on subnets. Normally, when you're dealing with normal subnets, all you do is you take whatever the IP address that you put into the system, and then you put 255 at the end. So 10.1.10.5. You would put in 10.1.10.255 is the broadcast address. Again, if you don't know what the broadcast address is, it's kind of a different class. Do a Google search on it. Basically, the broadcast address is what is the address that I can send out on, and every single computer that's part of this address range will hear. And then finally, underneath this is the gateway. The gateway is, of course, the default gateway. So normally that's the .1 address. So if we have 10.1.10.5, the default gateway is 10.1.10.1. So that is your router, that is your modem. That's how you get to the outside world. Like I say, pretty simple. So in order to change your interfaces file, this is what has your network configurations. It's sudo them space /etc/network/interfaces. Then you'll see if you're setting up a static IP address, auto, this is auto negotiate, is this 10 megabits per second, 100 megabits per second, a gig. What this means is that it will figure it out for you. For F0, this is the first network card. Then under that iFace, F0, inet, and then if there's a static IP address, you say static. Under that, you say address, space, and then you put the IP address. Under that, the net mask. This is a subnet mask, space, and whatever the subnet mask is. Under that, the network. Again, normally, it's whatever the first 3 digits are. So it's 10.1.10.0, 10.1.10.0. Basically, it just says what network they're on. Broadcast. Again, we'll have another subnet. We'll have a class on all this, but the broadcast address is if this computer needs to talk to everybody out there on the network, how do they do it? And they use a 10.1.10.255 address. And then finally, the default gateway. So, this is your router, this is your modem, this is whatever. How do you get to the internet, or how do you get off your little internal network? 10.1.10.1. One of the things you'll notice here is there's no place for the DNS address. That is actually a different configuration file, and we're going to talk about it in a second. So this is the major configurations, but remember, there's no DNS. So if you did these configurations and then you try to go to CNN.com or you try to do anything that required DNS, it wouldn't work because you have not plugged in DNS information yet. Now finally, with this, if you want a DHCP, this network card set up for DHCP, it is really easy. You keep basically these first two lines of code here. Only here for inet, instead of static, you simply put DHCP. So if you want this computer to get a DHCP address, you just do auto eth0 iface eth0 inet DHCP, and you don't need all the rest of this because all of the rest of this will come from your DHCP server. It's pretty simple. So, once you get done with this, with them, you do a :wq, you write the file and you quit and you're done. Now, once you've saved whatever configuration changes you need to save, remember you need to restart the networking services. So sudo etc/init :d/networking restart. Make sure you restart the services, the networking services, once you have messed with this configuration. Now, like I said, with this, if you put in a static IP address, there is no place in that interfaces file for the DNS. The reason is because for whatever reason, they put the DNS information into a different file. So the file for that you'll go to is sudo, again, vim. So we've been using vim as the editor. Then it's etc, and then it's resolv, resolv.conf. That's the file that you're going to edit the DNS information. So basically, with sudo vim /etc/resolv.conf, when that opens up, all you do is you plug in the IP addresses. So it'll open up and then you can plug in, I want my first DNS address to be 10.1.10.1, and then you go enter, and I want my second DNS to be 10.1.10.2, then I want my third to be 207.88.44.1. So basically, unlike in Windows where you can only put 2 DNS addresses, and Linux, you could put 500 if you wanted to. Just remember that Linux will process these in order. So it'll go to the first IP address that you give it first, and then it will go to the second, and then it will go to the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth and all the way down to the hundreds. Again, just like I said before, once you change this resolv.conf file, make sure to restart the networking service. If you don't restart the networking service, you're probably still not going to be able to use DNS, and then you're going to be wondering, what the hell's going on. Now, finally, we need to talk about the host name. Again, that was something, not in the interfaces file. So if you need to find out what the host name of your computer is, all you do is you type in the command sudo /bin/host name. This will echo, or this will print, or this will tell you what the host name is. So, you put in sudo bin host name, and it will come back as server. So it'll just tell you what the host name is. Pretty simple. Now, what if you need to change the host name? Again, it is rather dirt simple, like almost all these Linux tasks are. All you do is you do sudo, the same command, bin host name, and then you do space name. That's all you have to do to rename your computer. So, you want it to go from being server 1 to being server 10. All you do is you say sudo space /bin /host name space server 10, and then you're done. It's as I always say, it's that simple. Now again, once you do that, then you need to restart the networking service to make sure that all processes. And also with that, I would probably, if I have a DHCP client, I would run that dhclient command just to kind of make sure that the DNS has my IP address for that new name. But that's all you have to do. So if you're trying to change the host name of your computer, sudo bin host name, and then the name. It's all really, like I said, really that simple. The main thing to remember is it's the etc network interfaces file that contains all the information for your networking, for the NICs, the network cards that are on your system. Remember, like I say, in the Linux world, they work on the ordinal system. 0 is the first number, not 1. So if you're dealing with your first Ethernet card, you're dealing with 0. If you're dealing with your first hard drive, you're dealing with hard drive 0, etc. You go through, I gave you all the information. It's all, like I say, pretty simple. The main thing with that interfaces file is that it does not contain the host name and it does not contain DNS addresses. So, if you can't get to the websites, or if you can't do updates like you should, it's probably because your DNS isn't configured properly. All you do is you go to etc resolv.conf, resolv.conf, plug in the DNS addresses there, and you should be good to go. So now that I've explained all this on the whiteboard, let's go over to the terminal, and I'll just run through this pretty quick to show you how it works. So here we are, back at the server. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to open that interfaces file with Vim so that we can edit it and give this computer a static IP address. So we do sudo space vim space /etc/network/interfaces. And then you just hit enter. And give it my password. So this is the interfaces file, and like I say, you open it up with Vim. You just open it up with a normal text editor. If you go in, see this information about the loopback address. At this point, don't really worry about it. And then as you scroll down, it says the primary network interface. So as I told you, you see auto eth0. So that means the first network card, it only has one network card, which is eth0, and it's auto negotiate. That means the computer itself decides whether it'll be 100 megabits per second, 10 megabits per second, a gig per second, and whether it will be half duplex or full duplex. Again, that's a whole bunch of stuff for another class. Now, if you go down to the next line, you say iface eth0, so that means the interface eth0, and then inet dhcp. So as I showed you in the first example, the first little lab thing, this is receiving a DHCP address. So now we want to change that. We now want to give this server a static IP address. So since we're using Vim, I will now hit the A key, and this goes into insert mode. I can then go over, I can delete DHCP and insert static, S-T-A-T-I-C. Now that I've inserted static, I can go down and I can plug in all the information that I want to give for this Ethernet card. So we do address, DDRESS, and then it'll be 10.1.10. I don't know, let's say 54. And then we go down to the next and we say net mask. So this is your subnet mask, so 255.255.255.0. This is a Class C subnet mask, and by and large, you will most likely always be putting in a Class C subnet mask. So it's asking for the network, or it's asking, for the network. And this generally is the IP address, but with that last number being 0, so 10.1.10.0. Generally. Then you have the broadcast address. The broadcast address, again, it's the last address in the subnet mask, and that is used to broadcast messages out to all computers within a certain subnet mask. Again, if you don't really understand that, it's its own class. But if you have a Class C net mask, if you have a Class C subnet mask, which is 255.255.255.0, then the broadcast address will be whatever IP address you're putting in, only with 255 at the end. So 10.1.10.255. That would be the broadcast address. Again, there's a reason for it, but it would take a long time to explain. Then finally, you have the gateway. So this is the default gateway. So generally on a home or small business network, this will be your DSL modem, your cable modem, your T1 CSU, DSU, etc. So this is the IP address of the router or whatever will get you off the local network. And so for us here, it's 10.1.10.1. And so that is all you do. I have now inserted all the information to give this computer a static IP address. It now has an address of 10.1.10.54, a subnet mask or a net mask of 255.255.255.0, a network is, like I say, just take the IP address and put a 0 at the end. Broadcast, take the IP address, but to put a 255 at the end. And then the default gateway. The gateway is, well, whatever the gateway is. So once you get done with this, you escape again out of the insert mode, and then you do colon, and then you do WQ, so write and quit. And now it is done. I have now changed the configuration for this server. Since we have done that now, we should go over and change the resolv.conf file to make sure that if it has or doesn't have the DNS address. Because if I want to go out to the web for anything, of course, you know, the web browsers or everything is basically based off DNS addresses. So you have to put in a DNS address into the resolv.conf file so that the computer can resolve the DNS address. So you do sudo space vim space /resolv.conf and then hit enter. So when we open it up, it has here name server 10.1.10.1. So it was already in here. If it was not in here, we would hit A again and we would actually insert it. But it's already in here, so we can just quit. Q. Now that we've done that, the next thing is the host name. So to see what the host name of the computer is, you run sudo /bin /hostname. So sudo space /bin /hostname. And this says that the host name of this computer is server. So that is the computer name. Now let's say we wanted to change that. So we do sudo again, space /bin /host name space and then new server and then enter, and that's all you have to do to change the host name. Now if we run the hostname command again, we will see that the computer is now called new server. So that is all you have to do to configure the IP address on your Linux server, the DNS address, or the DNS resolution on your Linux server, and to change the host name on your Linux server. Just remember that the DNS and the host name are not in the interfaces file. Again, like I say, a lot of Windows people, you assume everything will be at the exact same place, but you know, being Linux, no, it's not. So with that, let's go back out to the real world and we'll talk about using ping for troubleshooting. Now the one little tool that we should remind you about, it works in the Linux world, it works in the Windows world, etc., is ping. P-I-N-G. If for some reason you're trying to troubleshoot, your network, you're trying to figure out what's going on with your Linux computer, the ping command can be absolutely invaluable. This tells you whether or not your computer is talking to anything else on the network or how far out on the network it's talking. So basically, if you're trying to see if your computer can contact, let's say the router, so your modem or your router that goes to the outside world. Let's imagine that router, the IP address is 10.1.10.1. So this is a pretty normal IP address for routers. All you do is you type in ping 10.1.10.1, and this will go out and it will ping, it will touch, or will try to touch that router, and then that router will send a reply back. So it'll say, hey, are you there? Yeah, I'm here. Hey, are you there? Yeah, I'm here. That's basically what happens in computer space. So you say ping 10.1.10.1. So it goes out and it'll communicate back. If you get destination not found, it means for whatever reason you cannot see that default gateway. So that means you may have a problem with your IP addresses, like maybe if you went in the interfaces file and you fat thumbed it, you put in the wrong numbers. It may mean your network card is disabled. It may mean something is unplugged. God knows what it means, but it means that you can't see it. The next thing is to make sure that your DNS is working, is you can ping a domain name. So like with me, every once in a while, I'll try to ping everymanit.com. This is my website. So you ping everymanit.com and I'll say, hey, I hear you. Hey, I hear you. Well, if I try to ping everymanit.com and it gets destination not found, but I can ping the IP address of everymanit.com, that means my DNS on the server is not working properly. That's where I need to go into the resolv.conf file and see what's going on. So the ping command, like I say, works in Windows, works in Linux, and it's absolutely wonderful. The one thing with Linux that's kind of a little weird, different than Windows, I suppose, is that it doesn't automatically stop. In the Windows world, if you do ping everymanit.com, it'll do it 4 times and then it'll stop. In In Linux, it'll just keep going and going and going and going and going forever. So the main thing, I think we talked about in one of our other classes, in order to break out of a routine in Linux is you hold Control C. So if it's pinging out there, ping, 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 and it won't stop, because it won't stop, and you need to break out of that, you hold down Control and then you hit C, and that will break out of the ping routine. So let's go over to the computer and I'll just show this to you real quick. So here we are, back at the server. So, like I said, this is just a very, very simple tool to make sure your networking is working properly. So right now what we'll try to do is we'll try to ping the router. So the router is 10.1.10.1. So we'll just do ping 10.1.10.1, and then we hit enter. And so now we can see, 64 bytes, ICM. So basically this means that it is working. And it's going to keep pinging and pinging and pinging and pinging and pinging and pinging and pinging, until you stop it. So like I say, in order to stop the ping command, you just hit Control, hold down Control, and then you hit C. And that will stop the ping command. Now, let's say I want to make sure that my DNS is working, so things are resolving properly. So I would do ping again. Then I would do www.everymanit.com. So this is going to ping my website and make sure it can resolve, or this computer can resolve, a domain name to an IP address. So if I hit that, so it says ping everymanit. It shows the actual IP address, 207.114.53.132, and then basically now you're getting the same thing, 64 bytes from yada yada, ICMP sequence, time to live, time, seconds, the whole 9 yards. So that is all you have to do for the ping command, and this shows you if you're connected to the network. So let's say you try to ping your router, 10.1.10.1, if that is your router. If you try to ping that and it's not working, well, then you can go into your network, your interfaces file, and make sure that you set up the interfaces file right. If that all seems correct, then you can take a look at the back of your computer and make sure that that little plug, the network cable, is still plugged into your computer. Sometimes that gets popped out. If that's still plugged in, go down, make sure the switch is okay, make sure it's still turned on. Maybe you have to restart the switch. The ping is just a very just easy command you can use, like I say, to go out there and see if you can touch other computers either on the local network or out on the World Wide Web. Again, like I say, to make sure that your DNS is working, because a lot of times, like if you try to do updates or if you try to do things in Linux, it will try to contact servers using their DNS address. Well, if your DNS is not resolving properly, then that process will fail out. So pinging using a domain name, like I say, www.everymanit.com, you'll get feedback back and make sure that you can actually resolve that domain name. But that's all there is to ping. Now we'll get into the fun of the UFW Firewall. Now, the final thing that we need to talk about for networking is, of course, the firewall for security for your server. Ubuntu Linux comes with a built-in firewall, and it's called UFW, and by and large, it is very secure, very robust, and easy to use, as long as you know the commands. So the first command that you should learn is called sudo UFW status. So sudo UFW status. This will show you the status of the firewall. Is it up? Is it down? And if it is up, what are the rules? So it'll tell you this is blocked, this is allowed, etc. So basically the first command is sudo UFW status. This shows you the status of your firewall. The next is to set the default parameters for your firewall. So if you turn your firewall on, will it allow everything or will it block everything? So depending on what you want for your server, you may want your server to be completely open with a firewall, or you may want it to be completely blocked with a firewall. That's all up to you. So all you do is you do sudo UFW default. So this says what is the default setting, and then you either say allow or deny. Those are the two words. So if you want to block, if when you turn on the firewall, the default, you're gonna change the rules later, but if you want the default to be block, then you do sudo UFW default deny. And this means when you bring that firewall online, it will block all network traffic by default. If you want to allow all traffic by default, sudo UFW default allow. Again, as we've talked about, this is a security decision on your part. I can only tell you how to do it. I can't tell you why you should or shouldn't do it. So that's a status, and that's the default setting. Pretty simple. Now to turn on UFW, all you do is you do sudo UFW, and then you either do enable or disable. So if you want to turn on your firewall, sudo UFW enable. If you want to turn off your firewall, sudo UFW disable. Really pretty simple right there. And then if you want to allow specific ports, so this is where you start adding rules to your firewall. Do you want to allow traffic to come in, or do you want to deny traffic to come in? So all you do is you do sudo UFW, and then you say allow or deny, and then what port number you're talking about. So like I say, if you want to secure your web server, you would bring UFW online, and then you would allow port 80. So this means people can come in to your server on port 80. Sudo UFW allow port 80 allows people to come in. Now let's say there are ports that you don't want people to use. All you would do is you'd say sudo UFW deny, and whatever the ports are. So basically, when you're normally dealing with servers, the idea is for default. The default is when you turn your firewall on, everything should be blocked. And then you go in and then you allow certain ports. So you would allow port 80, you would allow the FTP port, you would allow the secure shell port that we'll talk about. So basically the idea is that you lock down every port except a couple that you're going to need. So in order to allow, again, sudo UFW allow or deny, and then the port number. It's pretty simple. Now, again, like I said, I showed you the status command, sudo UFW status. That's where it'll show you if the firewall is up or if it's down, and then it will show you what rules you have programmed into the firewall. Now, let's say, for whatever reason, you decide to delete a rule. You don't like whatever rule it is. Again, very simple. Sudo UFW delete. Delete, and then again allow or deny, so whatever the rule is, it's your rule, and then whatever port it is, let's say port 80. So let's say I had a web server, I'm allowing people to come in, then I decide to take the web server offline and use it only for a file server. Sudo UFW delete allow 80. That will delete the rule. Whatever the rule is, that's all you delete. Sudo UFW delete allow or deny, and then whatever port number, basically what the thing is. So the final two things that are really cool is you can block people or allow people by IP addresses. So let's say you like with me, if I want to get to the web server, I want to allow only my static IP addresses to be able to get to the secure shell on the web server. Well, one of the ways you can block access by IP address is you can do sudo, and then what is it? Sudo UFW, of course, allow or deny from, and then whatever the IP address is, 207.88.44.1. So this, if I say I want to allow traffic from this IP address, it will allow that particular IP address to connect to the system and do whatever it wants. Again, this is a very simple thing. This also does wildcards, so you could do, let's say, 207.10.star.star. So this means any IP address, 207.10, would be allowed in. This might be good. Let's say you have a corporate, you have an enterprise environment. When you go out to the internet, you don't always necessarily know which specific IP address you're using to get out to the internet. You may have an IP range. This allows you to use that IP range to connect to whatever system it is you're connecting to. So this sudo UFW allow from, this says, again, from any specific IP address. Then, if you want to tighten that down, you can say from whatever specific IP address to a specific port number. So again, so you'd say sudo UFW allow, let's say from 207.88.1.40 to, and then you do a 2, let's say 22. I think 22 is SSH. So basically what this would say is people coming from this particular IP address are allowed to go to this particular port. Makes life easier. Like I say, remember, these Linux servers that you're going to be using, most of the reason people use Linux is because they need a robust, powerful, secure server that's going to be facing the internet. So it's going to be connected directly to the internet. So being able to put in these rules basically makes your server a whole hell of a lot more secure. So like I say, with me in the web servers, I make it so my home static IP address and my business static IP address can get in. Nobody else can get in. Like I say, makes things more secure. For that, sudo UFW allow or deny, if there's a reason to deny it, from IP address to that particular port number. You just continue, like I say, is if you have to add a number of IP addresses, you would just do this command a couple of times and add in whatever IP addresses you need. So like I say, pretty simple. Let's go over to the Ubuntu server and then I'll show you how this works. So here we are back at the Ubuntu server. Now the first thing that we should do is check on the status of UFW, of the firewall. So to check on the status, you do sudo space UFW space status, status. And you can see that the current status is inactive. So before we turn it on, we want to make sure that the default for the firewall is to block everything. Because if the default is to allow everything when the firewall is on, that kind of defeats the purpose. So the command to make sure that the default is to deny everything is sudo space UFW space default space deny. And this will make sure that when you turn the firewall on that everything is blocked. So we hit enter, default incoming policy changed to deny. Now, in order to turn the firewall on, we do sudo space UFW space enable. Enter. And now that has turned the firewall on. Since the firewall is now on, we should check to see what the status of the rules are. So when you check the status and the firewall is off, you just see status inactive. When you check the rules and the firewall is on, or when you check the status and the firewall is on, you see what the current rules are. So we go in, and we can see that there are some rules in here. So we won't worry about that now, but it's good to know this is where you can go in, and once the firewall is on, you can see what it is blocking or what it is allowing. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to enable some ports. So let's say that this is a web server. Web servers, require port 80 to be open. Websites work off of port 80. So if this is going to be a web server, then people from the outside world need to be able to access port 80. People from the inside world, basically everybody needs to access port 80. So we can open it up for everybody. For that, you just do sudo space UFW space allow space 80. So that's allow port 80. And the rule has been added. If we go back and we check the status, so we do sudo UFW status, we can see now at the bottom port 80 is open. So to port 80, action allow from anywhere. So anywhere means absolutely anywhere in the world. Now that that's happened, let's say that we want to delete a rule. So let's say we wanted to not allow people to get to port 80. That again is just very simple. You just sudo space UFW space. All you say is delete the rule that you want to delete. So our rule that we wanted was allow 80. So if we allowed 80, that means people can get in through the web service. If we delete the rule, now it means people cannot get through the web service. Now, let's say that we have an administrative computer, and that's local here, and we want that administrative computer to be able to access absolutely any ports it wants to be able to access on this web server. So, you know, it might need SSH, it might need FTP, it might need port 80. It just needs to be able to do whatever it wants to do on this server. To open up all the ports on the server for a specific IP address, all you do is you do sudo space UFW space allow space from, and let's say a local computer, so 10.1.10.65. So by running this rule, it means that the computer at IP address 10.1.10.65 will be able to access all the ports on the server. We hit enter, and the rule has been added. Now let's say I have a computer at home and I want to be able to access this web server at work for SSH, for secure shell is something. It's a way you can remotely control a server. So what I want to do is I want to say from my external IP address at home, I want to be able to access port 22. For that, all you do is you put in sudo space UFW space allow space from space. Now you put in whatever the IP address is. So the external IP address at home, I don't know, let's say it's 208.55.67.4. Then you say to space any. This allows any protocol to get to the port. And then you say port, and then whatever port you want this IP address to be able to access. So like I say, we're trying to access port 22. Now you hit enter, and now if I'm at a computer at home, when I try to access this server at work, I will be able to access the server at work at port 22. If we go back and we look at the rules, so we do sudo space UFW space status, we can now see that if you look at the bottom, to port 22 allow 208.55.67.4. Or you can also see up third from the bottom, you see 22 allow from 22.22.22.22. So that may be like an old rule that you want to get rid of. So using the status, you can see, like I say, everything should be denied, and then you can come in here and you can see who is allowed to get to what. You know, if a hacker can get in and open up a port for themselves, that they could do a lot of damage. They could hack your system and then launch attacks from your system. But that's all there is to UFW. It does take a little bit of playing around with, but overall it's a very simple firewall system. Basically, again, as long as you know the commands. So let's go back out to the real world and have some final thoughts.
So that's basically all you need to know for Linux server network configurations. I showed you the configuration file. I showed you how that works. I showed you some of the basic tools. I showed you the ping command. I showed you the firewall, etc., etc. Let's keep saying with all this track, it's all pretty simple as long as you know the commands. I know one of the questions that come up, because most of you guys are from the Windows world, is what about drivers? Well, here's the funny thing with Linux. The drivers it has out of the box almost always work. I mean, like 99.9% of the time, especially for things like networking. It just works. And it just works well. And you normally don't have to worry about it. So if you have one of the random computers that you actually need to worry about the network card drivers, that's kind of just an advanced topic because it just happens so unusually. Also, we did not go over wireless configurations in this class because, again, talking to you guys, this is mainly about servers. Usually servers are not actually connected using wireless networking. Again, you can connect your Ubuntu server using wireless networking, but it's kind of its own kettle of fish. It takes its own little class to understand. We may have a class on it later. If not, you can just do a little research and you can see how it's done. Again, for servers, you rarely put them into a wireless environment. So if you're one of the people that do, you can figure it all out. But But like I say, networking is pretty simple at the end of the day. The main thing I need you to remember with all of this is, again, when you change the interfaces file or any network configurations, make sure to restart the service. If you do not restart the networking service, you're going to have all kinds of problems and you're not going to understand what's going on. And the only reason you're having the problems is because the server has not reloaded all those configurations. The other thing is, remember, the DNS and the host name are not in the interfaces file. You have to go into resolv.conf to add your DNS addresses for your computer, and then you need to use that little bin hostname utility to change the hostname. That's just a big thing, you know, like I say, people forget, and then they wonder why they can't get any updates or anything. The reason is because the updates, the little update program requires DNS, and then DNS isn't working, and it all goes. Again, like I say, ping works the same way, basically in Linux as it does in Windows. So if you're trying to do some basic network troubleshooting, do ping. You know, ping will keep running. It's not like Windows where it shuts off after 4 attempts. So just hit the Control-C to break out of the little ping command. You should be good. And also, like I say, is if you're trying to find information about your network cards, you know, IP addresses, etc., the ifconfig command will show you that. So it'll say eth0, this is the MAC address, this is the IP address, whatever. You know, eth1, this is the MAC address, So, you know, really, that's all there is to Linux networking. Again, like I say, showed you the firewall and everything, so that there are more complicated things that you can do, but what I just showed you, that you can basically set up your networking for almost any server that you need with this class. So as you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy, over here for Everyman IT. This was Linux networking, and I look forward to seeing you at the next class.